So a study by the Trade Union Congress, the TUC, has found that more than 1 million children from key worker families in the UK are living in poverty. So that's incredibly disheartening and very distressing and, quite frankly, just sad. Their study found that 1 in 5 children living in the households of key workers are living below the breadline. You know, their families are really struggling to afford the basic necessities. You know, food and paying the water bill, the energy bill, paying the rent, buying clothes, etc. And obviously the pandemic has exacerbated these issues in many ways, but this has been a problem in our society for a long time. I mean, you know, look at the way the nurses have been treated in terms of their pay, their working hours, their working conditions. The nurses' bursary was removed. You know, so there's been a real kind of sickness in our economy for a long time, and this report shows that. So the TUC said, and this is reported by The Guardian, that low pay and insecure hours, widespread in occupations such as social care, people working in supermarkets and delivery drivers were the main reasons for in-work poverty among key workers. So Frances O'Grady, the TUC's General Secretary, said, "Every key worker deserves a decent standard of living for their family, but too often their hard work is not paying off like it should, and they struggle to keep up with the basic costs of family life." And then they go on to talk about how, you know, if Boris Johnson and the Conservatives are talking about building back better and, you know, sort of levelling up the economy, the phrase they like to use a lot, then we should absolutely be starting with the people whose jobs are so essential to our society and our economy that society would have just stopped, it would have just collapsed if they hadn't kept going during the pandemic. You know, it's really unfathomable how we will clap for these people, and we will talk about how essential they are. We will literally call them key workers, and then we won't pay them a living wage, not even like a really good wage, not even just like a decent wage, a living wage. We won't even pay them enough to pay the basic bills, put food on the table. I mean, that is ridiculous, right? And there are lots of problems that are exacerbating that, like the fact that you know, there's a huge issue that we have in this country with the amount of power landlords have, because you have, you know, far too much power in the hands of the landlords and not the tenants, so the landlords can charge exorbitant rates, and the housing market is a whole mess right now, and that's a whole other issue that's feeding into that. But at the end of the day, you know, we have a real problem with insecure jobs, with jobs where people have to work too many hours, and situations where their working conditions aren't particularly safe, especially throughout the pandemic. That's been the case. I mean, people working in social care, obviously people working in the NHS, it's been incredibly dangerous, and the police force and the fire service. But even in social care, it's been very, very dangerous. And in supermarkets sometimes, you know, there haven't been the right, and it goes on and on and on. So if Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party really believe in levelling up the economy and, you know, building back better, they need to start paying key workers a living wage, at the very least. In my mind, I mean, in my opinion, and you know, if you look at the studies that are out there about people who work in various jobs that are key workers, you know, teachers and people who work in sanitation and things like that, they actually contribute more wealth than bankers and hedge fund managers and advertising executives, people like that. Because when there's been a lot of analyses done that show that actually those people are destroying wealth further down the economic chain. I believe it's I can't remember who did this study, but it was essentially it showed that for every, I believe it was for every dollar an advertising executive made, $5 was destroyed further down the economic chain in the form of pollution and stress and depression and anxiety and all these different things, right? So we as a society don't value the right people. We're not paying people wages that reflect the importance of their jobs. Often it's just about how adequately and effectively you can move money from one place into another and make someone who's already wealthy even wealthier. That's how you make loads of money, right? So it really is a really sorry state of affairs. And as the TUC General Secretary points out in that article, which isn't written by them, by the way, it's just there's a quote in the article, you know, this isn't just a moral thing. If you put more money in the pockets of working people, that money gets spent in local communities. The high streets improve, local businesses, you know, the economy grows. You put more money into the hands of the ultra wealthy and the super rich, the CEOs and the hedge fund managers and those lot, then, I mean, good for them, they can buy a third yacht, but they tend not to really spend much of their money. They tend to shift it away in an offshore tax haven, or they do spend it somewhere else, like buying a private island, or going to space, but not really space. You know, it's really important that we kind of re-engineer the economy to reflect who does the real work, who does the important work, and just from a moral viewpoint, making sure that all people have a decent standard of living, because we can provide that to everyone. We can. We just choose not to, right? We make an active choice not to, and that's, when you really think about it, that's baffling, because all the evidence shows us that something like a universal basic income would be very successful. We could eradicate poverty. We choose not to, and it wouldn't, you know, harm employment or anything like that. So the first step in creating a fairer economy is getting decent wages and fair working hours and safe working conditions for key workers, because it is an absolute crime that one in five children in key worker families are living below the poverty line. It's an absolute crime. So you might be thinking, alright Riley, well this is all well and good, but this was done by the Trade Union Congress. Hello? Those loony lefties. And first off, I'd say, you know, unlike a lot of people on the right, the left doesn't cherry pick data as much, and you can tell that, especially if it's reported by some, like a place like The Guardian, who, you know, do rigorous research for these kind of things. But secondly, the Trade Union Congress is not a biased organisation in terms of any political party. It's not a biased organisation in terms of any particular ideology. It's just biased in favour of ordinary working people in the UK. That's it. And, you know, the study is out there if you want to go and read it for yourself. But I think it's very important we don't just dismiss this because it was done by the Trade Union Congress. And they've done some amazing studies with lots and lots of data for years now, and the stuff they've done is very important because it kind of conveys a lot of the ins and outs of the economy in quite a digestible fashion, and how our economy has become increasingly unequal, unjust, and insecure for decades now, you know, since Thatcher in the 80s. And obviously, you know, things like worker productivity not matching up with wage improvements and inflation and things, you know, there's all kinds of different things. So, you know, we have to make sure we act on this. I'm sure the Conservative Party won't, which is why I urge the Labour Party to do something about it. Again, think that's very unlikely, but I think they're more likely to care about it than the Tories will. But you know, I don't care who's in power. If you do good things, I'll support them, right? And right now we have a real crisis. And you know, if productivity, as I said before, if productivity improvements in people's work had, you know, if wages had improved with productivity improvements and inflation, we would have a much higher minimum wage than we do now. Much higher. It'd probably be somewhere in the realms of like 15, 16 pounds, maybe even more. We need to do better. Working people are putting in so much effort. They are working tirelessly, especially key workers, and they're just not getting anything back really. So let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think, you know, this is a failure of government policy? I mean, a lot of these people do work in the public sector, but of course the government is still responsible for people working in the private sector to an extent. Do you think, you know, what do you think the ways we can solve this are? Do you think, you know, we need more regulation of companies? Do you think we need to raise the minimum wage? Do you think we need jobs programs, public works programs? Do you think we need, you know, democratic workplaces instead of privately owned ones? How do you think this should change? Because clearly something's got to change. Because poverty in general doesn't need to exist in our society, but in-work poverty is truly baffling. So I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.